welcome to this episode of the Unholy Trini-tea. Your hosts today are me, obviously, Jesseca, a recovering evangelical turned agnostic. We have Jegaysus, our Lord and Savior, King of Queens, and Andrew, a Christo-centric mystic. Hello. Hi, Andrew.
Hello.
Greetings.
Greetings, Earthlings.
So for this very special episode, we're going to be delving into Christianity in America and exactly how that became part of the Republican Party, or should I say how it was co-opted by the nationalist movement. For better or for worse, it's affected everybody, whether you're in America or out of it, and we decided let's go through some of that history and talk about why.
Let's get in there. Before we do that...
Before we get into that, sorry.
Yeah, it's okay.
How was everyone's week?
Jinx.
I'm doing great.
How was your week?
Short answer. I love it.
Any exciting thing happened
Yeah, details
this week?
on that?
Just great.
I built an archway for some vegetables, and I have bottle gourds and beans that are going to grow up, but they're all sprouted already. I'm excited about that. I've also just had a really good, consistent medication week, and I'm caffeinated right now, and so I feel really good.
Get that mental health. Jegaysus?
Nothing new to report. I feel like, again, it's just a circular life, you know? You wake up, you do the things, you go back and do the things. So that's where we're at.
Just
for better or for
around.
worse. Whatever that is, yeah. I survived my essay that I was complaining about last week, and we don't know what the grades are on that, because that's going to take 4 weeks, but I assume it's going to be bad.
4 weeks.
So that's just school anxiety. Outside of that, just working, unfortunately. Been avoiding TikTok. I didn't post at all this week, except for some reposts, but that's mental health as well. Social health, mental health, social media, mental health.
Yeah.
I also did not post it all this week, but that's because I was banned again. So
Well,
I'm pretty positive you've been banned. Every time we do an episode, you're banned.
I was gonna say every
It feels like
Saturday. It feels like
Yeah. Which is still the strangest thing to me, because I feel like if anyone was going to be banned, it would be me.
Yeah.
Because I'm literally just on there I don't give a fuck. Stop talking to me. And then, and you're like, hi, I love you. Let me tell you nice things. And TikTok is like, nope. Areola Stone Temple Pilots, get out of there. R.I.P.
No, we won't explain that joke to any of you.
Yeah.
You need to watch the rest of our episodes.
Yeah, and if you don't, I put one shoulder up, I put the other shoulder up, and I drop them, because I don't care.
Boom, bada, boom.
My week has been hot ass mess, but it's on the up and up. My car was stolen last weekend, but fortunately for me, I was able to disable it remotely and then tell the police where it is. The police took their sweet ass time, but eventually I did get it back, and by back I mean it's now at the dealership getting work done. I almost broke my toe. Very exciting. And that's about it,
How'd you break your toe? Is it broken for sure?
It
or
was
is it just,
a bar fight.
Broken?
No, I don't actually know if it's broken. It's just really purple. And no, I was just reading some stupid memes that my friend sent me in a group chat called Jesus memes. And I'm not even joking. And I think it just took a corner too hot right into the table. I'm very grateful.
It's not very glamorous, but you have the added points for being in a group chat called Jesus memes.
Yeah,
so
what can I say?
Which Jegaysus
you saved yourself.
These memes.
Unfortunately not, but if we make some Jegaysus memes, I can put them to the chat.
I was going to say, if there are listeners out there who would like to make Jegaysus memes, I'm never going to turn you down.
Yeah, never.
Go for it. Never. You will have my eternal praise back.
I will forgive you forever.
I will yes, this is your indulgence. Your way into heaven is through Jegaysus memes.
Because you know what you did.
You know what you did.
You
for
know
whatever it is. You don't have to tell me. Please don't give me details. But
don't
I know.
Confess.
We all know.
We all know. All right, so why don't we get into it? Shall we? Andrew, you want to kick us off?
Okay, so in the last couple of weeks, we've talked about a number of things. Even from episode 1, we started initiating this idea that there is a fundamental difference between religions and empire, but there's a point where they kind of reach essentially a point of no return, right? Where they become fused in some really dangerous ways. And we've seen that in a lot of different places, but our conversations, mostly because of our experiences, have been mostly around Christianity in America. What we have yet to do, though, is talk about Christianity as we see it today within the United States and where that comes from. What happened? How did it get this way? Has it always been this way? And it's just really weird now because everyone can see it on social media. What's going on? So that's what we're going to talk about today. I have some history on, Christianity and how it's interacted with American politics. But before I do that, is there anything that you all would like to address? Like, when you think about Christianity in the United States, what do you think were the fundamental starting points that maybe triggered some of these things? When I was doing research on this, I was really surprised by some of the reasons that Christians started engaging in politics. I was surprised. So I'm wondering, what do you think the thing was?
The thing? There was a singular thing we can point to?
Yeah.
I'm surprised just by that. Okay.
So, I mean, for me personally, I wouldn't know exactly what to point to, but I do think there is certainly something. Okay, so I'm not being very articulate. So I know there was certainly a branch of Christianity, or Christianity at the time when slavery was occurring, that very much was a way to keep people subjugated and to keep that power. And that power was political and it was economic. And whether or not people wanted it to be, it was, because economics is inherently political and politics is inherently economic.
Right.
And so I think that in this, I'm sure it was before that, but that's something I always think about, how religion was used to keep first of all, to justify colonization, and then to justify the slave trade, and then to continue to justify having slaves from there. But I'm sure it goes further back than that. Good old Cotton Mather.
Cotton Mather.
Imagine being named Cotton.
What do you think, Jegaysus?
Well, no, see, I mean, that's where I was going to kind of go to, but then I started thinking about this TikTok I saw the other day about Calvary Temple trying to work its way into politics specifically. And in the 70s, they're working into like a lobby group, becoming more involved. And this is when you start seeing things like abortion become an issue. And they start realizing that the power that they have throughout legislation is something that's been primarily unharnessed in previous American history, but that's not necessarily true. Because, I mean, like, if you think about, like you were saying, slavery, and if you think about things like prohibition, like, these are movements that were pretty much Christian movements.
Yeah, I think you're thinking of Shaky Bake in Calvary Chapel.
What's Shaky Bake?
The person, you sent me this video.
Did I? Yeah, 'cause I was like, we want to talk about it. See, I don't even remember last week, y'all.
Well, I mean, also, and this is, again, is not going to be the, like, starting point, but we have, like, the Family Research Council, the Grahams, and all of that, where the lobbyist groups start up with this idea of family values, right?
Focus
but that's,
on the
again,
family,
is certainly,
obviously.
like, more recent than I think. So I certainly think that politics and religion in America have been tied up for a much longer time than that. But I think that that time specifically is when it takes a real hard right into being a political lobbyist group.
Well, if I think about, like, the very beginning, right? If we're thinking about the first 16 or so presidents, they weren't running on a platform of, like, I'm a Christian man. They might have. I just wasn't there.
But also, like, this country wasn't founded on Christianity. Like, I know everybody says that, but really it wasn't. And I don't even think it mattered. And I also think at that time, everybody was kind of a church-going person, right? I mean, like, most people anyway.
I wonder if that's a failed assumption on our, like, 2021 itself.
Yeah, I
So
was just
wonder
thinking
if
that.
maybe we just assume everyone is a church-going person because that's how we've been fed it through the lens of evangelicalism our whole life.
Yeah, like as I was saying that, I was like, do I actually know that or do I just think that? I have an idea. Andrew, take it away. I'm just here speculating and you know the answers. So.
Yeah, why are we actually just sitting here just like talking ourselves into circles?
Yeah, and then
Okay.
he's like, actually, wrong.
No. So first of all, this could be many episodes. I'm not going to pretend like it won't be. But if we look back throughout American history, there are a lot of through lines that create this idea of religious-based nationalism. In fact, if we go all the way back to if we go back to the Federalist Papers, before they were assembled, for those listening, the Federalist Papers were these writings that were done by John Jay, James Madison, and Alexander Hamilton. And Alexander Hamilton, he wrote most of them, which was like a whole thing that I almost call him Bill Burr, but that's not right. What's his name?
It's Aaron
William
Burr,
Burr?
sir.
Aaron Burr. Yeah,
Aaron
they're
Burr,
not
sir.
related. Bill Burr.
I'm all
That's gonna be
William Burr.
headcanon for me from now.
I am smart. I am a genius.
Okay, so within the first writing of the Federalist Papers, we find language about how God ordains the colonies to become a government that could be ruled in freedom and granted them the land of the natives so that they could found a nation apart from tyranny. So we find language like that in as early as prior to us having the American Constitution.
Sure.
This idea of religious language, not necessarily. It would have been Christian, like the byline, the through line would have been Christian. There wasn't a lot of Muslim founding fathers that were sitting in the room talking about it. They all kind of exited this very Anglo, very pro-slavery structure of the European Empire. So when they talked about God, it would have been very hard to think about God as anything separate from what we would find in the Protestant churches. So we find that language that early on.
Yeah.
This idea that there is an ordination of this land to be a certain way of being. We've talked about how this kind of language, this supernatural language, has always been used to justify imperial structures.
And I was wondering how much of that is just a holdover from the same ideas that they've adopted into kind of just what they thought a government was, right? They're coming off of monarchy, who had this whole entire divine right to rule concept. So how much of that was just influenced by, well, God is the one who dictates who can govern, and we're just going to adopt that from being a singular family and bloodline into us being able to dominate and rule over, the natives.
Right. So odds are it was both, right? Because we don't really see a lot of religious practices clearly from the Founding Fathers. We don't really see those practices very clearly. We see that they have secularist logics, Enlightenment-based logics. We see them being very non-religious most of the time. Mm-hmm. And so any kind of religious language that would have been used would have either been presupposing a deity without associating with an actual religious practice, or perhaps just making use of that strong religious language because it's what it would have been the through line that people were used to hearing when thinking about the way the world should be. So that's a long way of saying that I think it's probably a throwover from monarchy, but it could have been a legitimate belief by the people as well.
Can I just say how disturbing I find it? And I know you all already know this and agree with it, but that in these Federalist Papers, it says that, God granted us this land from the natives in order to set a society apart from tyranny by effectively imposing tyranny on this indigenous people group. Cognitive dissonance has always been strong with the whites, of which I am a part, unfortunately. Anyway, I have no other point than that. I'm just always so perturbed by that when I hear it.
It's a fair point.
So we're just out here pretending that everything we do is God ordained and not tyrannical in the least, because it's not happening to us. Like,
Yeah. And they were
therefore,
fleeing literal subjugation to turn around and subjugate people.
others, yeah. And potentially in a more brutal fashion.
A much
I mean,
more brutal fashion, yeah.
Like, I know there was certainly persecution of different religious sects in, Europe, but they certainly weren't committing genocide, so,
Well,
it's a mess.
So
it's a mess.
What makes this a little bit muckier and grosser, I think, is all of these letters before they were assembled as the Federalist Papers were written under the surname Publius, and the way that they were read is they were put in the newspaper. And so this wasn't just this manifesto that only the elites were having access to. This was language that I thought would be receivable by all the voting body to side together with the Constitution being the way that it should be.
Yeah.
So this was their Twitter. This was their public discourse.
but I mean, and to be, not that I think, women would have disagreed, but we should also recall that the voting public at this point in time were wealthy white men. Like,
right.
Period, full stop, the end. Now, I'm not saying that the white women would not have agreed with it, but, like, just a reminder that, like, who's being even considered at this point is a very limited group of people. They're writing to themselves.
No, I don't disagree with that.
They're, tweeting, and then they're putting it on TikTok, being like, don't you agree? And then it's just like,
could you imagine a founding father TikTok?
I'm like, I feel like there's potential here for me to get, like, a
like
white poofy wig.
I was going to say, why haven't there been any accounts just doing one? There might be.
TM,
but
sorry, I'm the next TikTok founding father.
I think you should do it before this episode drops, because if somebody hears this on Spotify and then they steal your idea, you're going to be so mad.
I know. Anyway, it's going to be a sexy founding father. It's going to be OnlyFans founding father. No, I'm just kidding. Okay. We've got two.
Only founding fathers.
Only
OFF.
founding fathers. I hate it. Okay.
There's a market for everything.
God, if that ain't the truth. All right. Sorry.
Okay,
I got off the rails.
You're good.
What else is new?
that puts us right in the time of the 1780s. We already see this language very clearly. We see this language prior to in the debate over whether or not we should have the Constitution the way that it should be, right? So this is so when we think about this Declaration of Independence, and we go into the Constitution and the Bill of Rights and all of this language in the early stages of America when it's still an experiment, we already have this through line of religious language uniting people, but it is not necessarily Christian, but it is inherently anti-one religion, Catholicism.
Those damn Catholics.
Within the actual articles and within the Declaration, it's anti-Catholic?
There is a consistent rhetoric throughout the early stages of the American colonies and throughout, all the way up through JFK.
Okay. Yeah.
Who was the first Catholic president.
Right.
Of there being this, like, anti-Catholic rhetoric because...
But it makes sense.
Okay, tell us why. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, if I'm remembering correctly, it makes sense. I mean, the Protestants, or the people that fled to America to avoid tyranny, partially did that because they were being persecuted by the Catholic Church for being Protestants. So, I mean, it makes sense that they would then have an anti-Catholic bias. Because, not that we need to get into it now, but we've skipped over a large chunk of history, like the Reformation and, the Inquisition and, like, all of these things that happened where the Catholic Church was deciding what was orthodox, for lack of a better term, and what was not. And all of these smaller sections were getting persecuted by the Catholic Church, who was powerful. I mean, and we even see that, like, when we've talked about King James and his flamboyant bisexuality. Part of the reason that he needed to write his version of the Bible was because there were a number of versions going around, and the non-Catholic Church version, I can't remember what they called it, but wasn't the popular version. The popular version was the one that was, like, being used by the Protestants, and it was gaining popularity, but it definitely, what is the word? It sort of pushed back against the power of the Catholic Church in some ways, and against the authority that they had. And so that's why I believe it was Martin Luther, had to decide that, okay, well, the Bible is actually the ultimate authority, not the Catholic Church, because prior to that, the ultimate authority was whatever the church said it was, because nobody else could read the damn Bible. So, like, if there was a theological issue, the church just said, this is what it is, the end.
Yeah.
And then when Martin Luther came along, he was pushing back, and the only way that he could sort of have any viable opposition to the church was a higher authority, and really the only higher authority that you could get at the time was saying the Bible is infallible, 100% true, and it's exactly what the Bible says that we should be following. And of course, the Catholic Church doesn't like that. But I think we also tend to forget, we meaning like the general group of us, was that Catholicism was Christianity for decades, centuries. Like it was one and the same, and it only started to splinter off at a certain point, and then it was persecuted by the Catholic Church. The Protestants flee to America, and then of course there's going to be an anti-Catholic bias because they've been hunting them down, basically.
Right.
Yeah.
And you know, even when we look at the earliest Puritan colonies up in New England, when they looked for their authority, they looked exclusively to Scripture, but they also looked towards Greek philosophers. And that's another interesting byline that goes through the history, is that they upheld Aristotle, who was rejected by the Catholic Church, and they upheld the Bible and readers within the puritanical movements, which, as we may or may not know, all you listeners, Aristotle is arguably the focal point of where we get the notions of racial superiority in the modern world, because of his writings about the justification of the slave trade to the Western Mediterranean world, being that people that are born in hot areas or cold areas are uglier and dumber than the rest of us, and tend to have darker skin, which was their argument for why they found dark-skinned Inuit people and so forth up north in the cold. So
I hate it.
It's not a good one.
Yeah,
no.
I do. Think,
wouldn't
though,
recommend. 0 out of 10.
0 out of 10. So we have negative
Our Yelp
stars.
review is not great. It's not flattering.
Would not go there again. But I do also think it's a good reminder that, like, a lot of these people that we have lionized were actually kind of hot trash. I mean, they certainly had. I'm sure they certainly had.
What does
points.
lionized? Is that what you said? Lionized?
Yeah, lionized. Like, we've made them these heroes, right? We've made them.
Okay.
We hold them in
I've
really
never
high
heard that term.
esteem. I mean, like, everybody, if you mention Aristotle, thinks like brilliant, genius, you know,
Yeah.
cornerstone of Greek philosophy, whatever, bargain bin, and those things are true, but like it's also good to hold the reality of people front and center, because we also get a lot of these really racist, I don't even want to say undertones because they're not undertones, a lot of really racist ideology from these same people that then transferred over to America, which then ran with it. But yeah. Anyway.
Yeah, and so the two bylines that we start to see that are pretty interesting early on in the American colonies is this recapturing of Greek imagery, while also holding on to biblical themes, ideologies, and this like Protestant Christianity. Because like I said earlier, Publius, that name right there, that's the dude from the 500s who was a father of the Republic in many ways. That's where they took the surname for the writings of the Federalist Papers, and that's where we get a lot of these ideas at the same time. When we find ourselves jumping forward, and so I was going to jump forward.
Sorry.
Yeah.
Just a quick question. When you say the Republic, you mean the Republic of Rome or the Greek Republic?
I mean Star Wars, specifically.
Oh, okay. I've never seen it.
I did not see it going there, and I was like...
Yeah, so Publius was the co-founder in 500 BCE of the Republic of Rome.
Yes. Well,
him and,
go
ahead.
The monarchy of Rome, right? The Republic of Rome... Well, no, I'm sorry, you're right. The Republic of Rome was founded right after Lucretia was murdered. or suicided herself, unalived herself.
What a dope name.
Lucretia, I know. But like a cool,
well,
okay, when I say a cool story, it's an interesting story. It's not cool. But then, so Publius took over sort of after that, unalive. There was the king, I can't remember their names, I'd have to look at my notes, but I'm not going to go get them. There was a king, and there was the king's son, and I think the king's son was named something like, God, I don't want to murder it, but it's like Sextilius or Sextilian or something like that. And he raped this woman named Lucretia. Lucretia was from an aristocratic family. Lucretia then goes to her family immediately, tells them what happened, tells them who did it, and then she plunges a knife into her heart. Very dramatic, to be honest. But at that time, women didn't get a lot of justice. Not much has changed. Her family then takes her to the forum, takes her body to the forum, and says that she was a murder victim and that the son of the king had done it. And so they demanded that the king and his son both be exiled. And in a very rare showing of sort of unity of the people agreed. And so off the king and the prince go to exile. And soon after this, I assume with Publius and some other folks, the Republic of Rome was founded. And that's when the Senate sort of came into play and all of that, instead of the monarchy that existed before where there was a king and, whatever. Anyway, that's my brief Roman aside. So the Roman Republic was founded on the death of a woman. Ain't that a bitch?
Love it.
All right, let's go.
But at the same time, yeah.
Yeah.
We don't see a strong Roman female leader for a while, do we?
Or ever.
Or ever.
And so it's really interesting to think that this thing from 500 BCE becomes kind of this foundational structure for how America tries to recapture what it considers to be
the golden era.
Right.
Yeah.
So we find some really interesting stuff happening there, right? Because they want to do a pre-Christian nation, a pre-Christian empire, and their only real example is Rome. And so what they end up adopting is a lot of the exact same structures that we find in Rome. Whether it's their ideas of slavery, their ideas of racism, their ideas of governmental structures, a republic, a senate, and even some of their art. When we find one of the earliest and most famous depictions of George Washington, they deify him in what is called the Apotheosis of Washington.
Yeah.
And this was made in 1865. Well, it was completed in 1863. And they deified him, putting him among the clouds and the angels, and they could have gone very Catholic and medieval with the art, or they could have gone the other direction, and they chose to model him after a similar painting of Zeus.
Interesting.
That's the one that's like in the Capitol?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you guys, this might be a little too niche, but do you remember this like viral video from like the early 2000s about George Washington? And it was like, Washington, 6'20", fucking killing for fun. No? Nobody? All right.
Nope.
Well,
I do remember this. You better be there. You better be scared. He's coming. He's coming.
Yeah, okay, good. Somebody remembers. I hope someone watching this knows what I'm talking about and doesn't
600 feet made of radiation.
Yes, exactly. Washington. Okay, sorry. My, the early 2000s nostalgia took
Fucking
over.
killing for fun.
Yes.
This will be the part where my mom tunes out again.
Yeah.
Dang it.
Sorry, Mom. Love you.
I have a new thing to look up. That's all that means.
You'll love it. I don't know what it's called.
Okay. I'm sure internet will get me.
So what makes this really confusing is that when we look at the racial unrest in the United States, it's really difficult to parse apart, was the founding Greek philosophy or was the founding Christianity? And the honest answer is we can't say for sure. It had to be both. And that's really complicated.
Yeah.
Aristotelian-informed biblical readings.
Aristotelian. The hell is...
Aristotle.
Wow. Look at me learning a new word.
I don't even know. I'm pretty sure Aristotelian is exclusively Aristotle affiliation, right? Or is that more aristocratic?
I
have no
just was
idea.
using base words to put in your word and then just go with context clues. I don't actually know the word.
You sounded like
That
you
could
did.
have been an awesome sentence, or maybe it was shit. Boom.
Okay, so founding of the U.S. trash.
Yeah.
We're on the
They
trash
saw,
train. Let's just
they
keep
saw
going.
another empire and they're like, let's do that trash.
Yeah, that ended well for them.
Some
so
copy
let's...
and paste trash.
Yeah. Flippy is like, are you sure? Are you sure?
Imperial plagiarism wasn't a thing, and so they're just like, "Hey Rome, can I copy your work for an assignment?
it's
And
like-
just change it a little."
Bro, it's like the super whitest thing to be like, okay, that didn't work at all, but like, I'm sure I can fix it.
Yeah, right? Let me do
Like-
that again.
Yeah. Yeah, Rome, sack, thousands of people dead. It's not a problem. Blood sports, all good. Let's do that again, and I'll just make it better.
Did you
white
just
bro
explain American colonialism as white audacity on the Roman idea?
Is it anything else?
I was going to say,
It's
is
the
it not
most
that?
beautiful-
It has to be that.
That is
It's
it.
the most beautiful thing I've heard in a long time.
Yeah.
I wasn't ready for it, and I'm so glad that you said it.
Sometimes it just
I told you there was going to be a thesis in here, and
That's it,
here's
there you
the
go.
thesis.
Yeah, I mean, the founding of America is just white audacity on white hubris. That's it.
You look
Yeah.
so mind blown. The look on
I'm gonna have to
Andrew's
think about that
face
for
is
a
just
while, 'cause that's
like,
probably exactly true.
yeah.
I mean, imagine the hubris that went into founding Rome, into thinking they were the greatest nation and or empire, should be able to take over everybody in the whole goddamn world.
Yeah.
I mean, and then you get, this is sort of separate, but then you even get like a Roman thinking that they're going to take on Rome, like Julius Caesar crossing the Rubicon, like just a white guy being like, you know what? Fuck them. I'm going to take over. And he did. And then
How do you waddle with balls that big? Like, that's just...
Julius Caesar, like, I'm sure he was, he blows my mind, just like overall. And then he's like, you know what? I'm a perpetual dictator. What are you going to do about it? Nothing. And what did they do about it? Nothing. For a very long time. And then they were like, nah, just kidding. 23 stab wounds. And there was 40 of them. 40 of his friends were there. They only got in 23 stabs. Like, that's almost a 50% failure rate. Like, anyways,
Yeah.
sorry. I've been reading too much Roman history. The Ides of March is stuck in my brain.
Well, isn't it cool that, like, we're talking about America and, like, we can thread Rome through here a little bit in some fun ways?
I mean, it's cool. It's
slightly
also like,
terrifying.
yeah.
Actually.
It's interesting.
Well, me, like, as a child, right? So I remember specifically within, like,
You were a
my
Roman?
apocalyptic... Yeah, my Roman childhood. No, but within my apocalyptic, like, mindset and growing up in a church that was very heavily inspired... My entire teenage years were inspired by the Left Behind series.
Oh,
especially
Jesus.
the kids series. Love.
The
But-
anxiety...
Bro.
So much anxiety. But the only thing that I could
just
relate
waiting
to...
to be beheaded. Like, that's the future for me.
always.
So, like, where are my guillotines at?
I was not ready to get beheaded. I was just pretty sure I was going to be like the rock star hunter killer, skin my own animals. Like I was doing some disaster prep on my end.
I was like, I'm
But-
probably just going to renounce Jesus. I'm scared.
That's
I like
yeah,
my
that's
head
the easy
attached
way
to
do
my
it.
body. And then I'll just
And
ask
that's what I would
forgiveness
recommend
later.
all of our followers to do. If anybody
Yeah.
ever comes up to you with a gun saying, "Do you believe in God?" and if not, or if so, I'll shoot you. Like, say no.
Absolutely
God will
not.
understand.
Yeah.
But
One day we need to do an episode about evangelical ideologies in justifying mass shootings in
Bro.
schools.
So, okay,
Yes.
just a
Oh.
very quick aside. If you guys missed it, Captain Dadpool did a debate with some pastor on the old TikTok the other day. And the pastor really tried to use the story of that girl who,
Cassie, but
Yes,
you didn't
but
realize Cassie
Cassie
wasn't
Bernal.
the one.
yes,
Yeah.
but and that when they were like, oh, do you
This is
believe
the
in God?
Pastor
And then
John
shot her.
debate?
Yes, and then
Yeah.
everybody, because you remember in the early 2000s, and it was like, oh, instead of being like, how do we stop mass shootings? It was like, hey, just be ready to die for your faith.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, no, that's gonna have to be its own episode.
Yeah,
We need to get
but then
into
this
that.
guy
We
like really
do.
tried to use it as a.
He threw it out as a debate point.
and it's like that didn't happen, my boy.
It's not even real.
Like, yeah, it's
well,
not
I mean,
even real.
it sort of happened, and Dadpool called him out on it, and he walked it back, but then he couldn't remember the girl's name. He's like, "Oh yeah, it was actually a rape
But it's just like, how are you going to
something.
be in a debate and try and use that as a point? And it's just like, have you heard of Google?
It's hearsay at best.
Like,
all I remember about that debate is that he called Captain
Deadpool a
Deadpool
snack.
his
The
snack.
snack.
he's kind of a snack.
You're my snack.
Oh yeah, that was like, is it dark in the
Reverend.
closet? Do you have a light? Does anyone bring you food?
I mean,
So
I
deep
am
that he's
oddly
finding
attracted to
Christmas
him, and you
presents
know how that
and
works.
stuff.
If
I hate
I'm
it.
oddly attracted to somebody, it means that they're obviously a homosexual.
Yeah.
Ask any gay person
Sorry.
will tell you that.
Gaydar.
Okay, wait. Back to what I was saying. So,
Yeah,
in
sorry. we got
my
way off.
irreverent youth, right, in going through my Left Behind obsession, my only correlation that I could ever see between like America and living in the end times, I don't see the same connections most people say, like, oh, there's gay people on television and Will and Grace is going to be the end of it all. But the one thing I did see is like America as an empire and the rise of the empire coming together again as predicted in Revelation. I always was specifically taught it was about Rome. But what is America if not a modern Rome? And what the second piece of information I have about that is I was pretty confident that the end of times actually already happened during World War II. Because if you look at a map of old Rome and you look over a map of what Germany was conquering, they almost line up exactly. And I'm just pretty sure that like Hitler was the Antichrist and then he got shot and then he didn't rise. And I was like, it's already
And he
happened.
didn't
We
rise.
already missed the whole revelation. It's over.
I mean, the fact that people are really out here that have gone through American school systems, learned about the Holocaust and Hitler, and then were like, Obama's the Antichrist, tells you all you need to know about racism in this country. Like, I remember my
Right?
parents being like, thinking he was the Antichrist, and I was like, no, he's just black. That's it.
Yeah.
That's all. That's the tweet. He's just black, and so you think he's
It
the
literally
Antichrist.
mirrors like Hitler's Germany so closely because if you think about like, you know, I mean like the evangelical scope of Revelation, obviously not Revelation, but like the whole mark of the beast being like,
Yeah.
he was literally branding people.
He
was
literally was like, you
branding
have to
people.
wear this patch. And that was the tamer version, the patch. Like,
And then
Obama's
you
just
have the
trying to get us all health
reunification of
care.
all of Eastern Europe as it was in Rome. And I'm like, this is, you guys, it happened. Okay.
It's already gone.
What's a really interesting historical discourse there is that when we look at the rise of Germany in Europe and we look at the rise of America and its colonies, what we find in the World War is actually not patriots saving people from the Holocaust. We find Rome fighting another potential Rome.
Yeah.
We find two because both of them modeled themselves after Rome, because like Hitler branded Jews and American slave owners branded slaves.
Yep.
So it's this, and both of those things came from Rome, both those ideas. So when we find this battle that America is fighting, I mean, America does two kinds of fighting. It fights other potential Romes, and it expands the Roman Empire.
Yep.
That's the only fighting it does. It doesn't know how to create its own history. It just doubles down on Roman history, from best we can tell. So, yeah.
It's just so disheartening, but at the same time, really relieving to like know that's what's happening and just
It's all white people do is copy other people.
that is the one talent they have. They are very good at appropriating
Look,
everything.
I am white, okay? I could say it. I'll say it. What? Tell me, where are the
I
lies?
can't with y'all tonight. I can't with y'all.
Where
y'all
are the
too
lies?
funny.
There are
No,
no
none were
lies.
spoken.
There are no
detected.
lies.
Yeah. Like, literally all white people do is copy other cultures and other people, and they have done it since they founded this godforsaken country. And the fact that they think it's, like, blessed by God, just, like, I swear to God, white evangelicals think that Jesus holds a rocket launcher. Like, I know that they think he's up there with, like, an AR-15, just, like, yee-hawing around.
I was gonna say, how does this Roman like propagation and just overall bedrock expand into nationalist ideas, where obviously you don't have somebody who's like a Trumplican going around and thinking like, oh, you know, render unto Caesar what is Caesar's. So where does that like nationalist takeover kind of fall in? I don't think we have time to get into all of it.
Yeah,
but
sorry, we
Right.
Where
did what we
where
do.
does that where does the layman take up Rome's strategy and empire.
So what America did that's really fascinating with capitalism is it created the illusion that there's no longer the golds, the silvers, and the bronzes. It created this illusion that there's no longer a ruling class, that anyone can be the ruling class. So it used the narrative of freedom to have some people legitimately be the golds and convince everyone else they might be the golds tomorrow.
Yeah.
So
well, and at the same time, they gave them this idea. So, like, you see this especially when, and I don't remember the era, but it was in politics when the working class was starting to band together, and it was across racial lines. So basically, like, it was more to do with your economic status than it was to do with the color of your skin. And so then you start to see this push. You see, like, the crime and punishment rhetoric. You start to see all of these things that were there before, but were starting to fade out slightly because it was like, we're all poor, we're all suffering, and the only way we're going to get out of this is if we start voting together. That's a super oversimplification, but that's kind of what the I think it was actually the Republican Party at that point, because they flip-flopped.
I would say, see this a lot in the tenement riots before slavery was abolished, because then you have current slaves uprising against people, and then also white workers who are being disenfranchised be like, wait, you're treating them pretty much like we're being treated, which is trash. Let's join together. Okay, so when the colonies began here and slavery wasn't quite how we think of it now, right? So there was like indentured servants, but they were also white. There was, of course, black servants, but it was a much more of a mix and not so much of a subjugation of a people group because of the color of their skin, and therefore believing they're inferior. It was a bit of a mixture. And so prior to slavery being industrialized.
Exactly. Yeah. And so when you had these riots, it very much was a joining of just people that were being mistreated or that didn't have access to resources or that weren't doing well economically and yada, yada. And then what they did, the powers that be, gave the white folks just a little bit more power than the other people groups or the black people, the people of color. And so these people then had some kind of like, the white people thought like, oh, well, I have, my position is a little better in the world. And it's crazy how the lengths to which people will go to be like one rung above on the ladder of what, on the ladder.
I know this sounds kind of weird, but it's also important to keep in mind too. A lot of the reason that, at least from what I've read, yeah, sure, they did it to like kind of quell the riots and stuff. Well, this is later. I'm talking like, right before Lincoln, whoever was before Lincoln, that president right before, who's pushing buttons. What's his name? Everyone loves him. But a lot of the reason why they started making like clear distinctions in terms of like treating the white farmers and the people living on the outskirts better is specifically not only to quell the riots, but also to stop intermixing of the races. Yeah. Because they're super hyper concerned that if they were on the same playing field, then you will have white people crossing over with black people, and then it's just going to add to their problems of being able to clearly define black and white. So they really were worried about the mixing. So instead of making it like, hey, we're going to treat black people worse and white people better, it was more like, we'll give you an inch to make sure that you can also treat black people bad so that you can take these white superiority ideas and then also treat them bad because we don't want you falling in lust with them. In lust.
And so, yes, absolutely to what you said. But jumping forward, I think it's like post Great Depression, when we have the Republican Party at that point would have been closer aligned with what we call Democrats today. We see these, again, just working class people starting to band together a little bit because they realize that they're not going to get anywhere politically or economically if they don't have the numbers. And so again, then we start to see intentional, I'm trying to think of how to phrase it, an intentional push by the powers that be to, again, paint African Americans as the bad guys and as less valuable and as less important and worthy and all of that. And we see that a lot with like the crime and punishment rhetoric, where, it's a dog whistle. And so then you start to see white people again, they're like, okay, well, I'm like one rung above them. So, I'm going to make it. And the only way I'm going to make it is by stepping on these people and making sure to treat them like shit. Because that's how it's always, and I certainly white people do this, but it's something that you do see just a lot in people groups is like, oh, I'm like one above them. I want to make sure I maintain my status. Because I'm not the bottom on the totem pole. And instead of looking up and being like, okay, I'm 15 rungs below these people, and why is that? And why not, band together with everybody? But people don't do that often.
Well, it's and a lot of this also just kind of goes back to economic structure, right? Because we've created an economics of scarcity.
Right.
Which is hilarious because there's billionaires. How can there be scarcity if there's billionaires?
Yeah.
Like,
there's not scarcity.
And so what it ends up becoming is, it's unfortunate that they're below me, but I've got to do my best to get mine.
Yeah.
Creating this sometimes intentional, but mostly unintentional competition between people that should be banding together against the people that have the most.
Right.
Yeah.
The people that are stealing the majority of the resources to begin with.
Which, going back to Rome, is the whole, bread and circuses argument?
Yes, exactly.
Keep them fed and keep them entertained, and then they won't revolt.
Exactly.
It's kind of true. Feed me, entertain me. Tell me I'm pretty.
I'm seeing pretty clearly right now this needs to be a two-parter. Like, there's no way we're going to get through all this in one episode. And that's, I don't think there's a problem with that, if you guys are willing to do.
Always willing.
Deal.
Always willing.
So, okay. Where can we find a landing point on this one? Think. Okay, I got it. So we see these clear Roman through lines and Greek philosophy through lines and religious rhetoric through lines in American history, where it's surprisingly anti-Catholic and pro-Rome and pro-Greek philosophy, so that it can uphold this non-Christian nation that is actually modeling itself after an empire.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When we get into the point of past the Great Depression, once we exit those decisions, when we find ourselves getting past the Civil War, we find ourselves getting closer to things like the issues of race around freed people, which causes a lot of religious unrest in the United States. So I think that's probably where we'll land today on the episode, is just for the first bit of the country, the way that it ended up becoming so Christian wasn't because it started off trying to be very Christian. It became very Christian because it became the most powerful religious rhetoric, and it was emulating empires that modeled their justification, their structuring, and their policy off of the justification that God was on the side of the decisions they're making. Yeah. And in a post-European empire, the religious rhetoric would have been Christian.
Yeah. Well, and
that's the rhetoric they had to use.
Exactly. I think, again, I don't want this to sound like I'm justifying anything, but I think sometimes we forget the absolute lack of cultural diversity in places like Europe at these times that we're discussing. It's like everybody's white, and the only time that they go places where people aren't white is when they're going with the intent to get resources. And I don't mean people, I mean resources off their land, right? Like mining for rubber, or mining's not the right word, but all of these things. And then of course, then taking people as slaves. But I think it's easy to forget, again, not a justification, that these people are sitting around and they're all they know, and this religion is all they know. And so at this time, people are going out and going across places in the world and doing things. And so of course they're going to think God's on their side. And that's the only way that they're going to be able to justify all the things that they're doing.
Because they're still supernaturalists by and large.
Exactly. There's not a ton of people being no, God probably isn't up there, or maybe you should think about God in a different way. It's just no, God was sort of a given for most of them. And so again, very much like we talked about before with the Romans, and even with the Greeks, I think, if if something is happening, it's because God ordained it. The end. If we're stronger,
Yep.
it's because God ordained us to be stronger, and now we're going to go and, take over these lands, because that's what everybody had done up until that point, and there had never been any really critical thought about it. It just was what it was. Unless I'm missing some, large swath of, critical writings on why there shouldn't be, expansion. But if you're looking at Rome, that was their entire purpose, was expansion. Even if it is ultimately what got them sacked. The old Visigoths.
It's kind of strange in a sad way. It's almost, it would almost feel better if there was just this clear religious intentionality to take the religion and twist itself to the top so that it can rule over people. That almost feels better, because it's okay, it was just evil people that we know the names of that did this thing.
Yeah.
But what's sadder for me is that from best we can tell, it was just circumstantial.
Yeah.
It just, they just used the tools that they thought would work with the rhetoric they had before.
Well, it was just, it's who they were, right? And I think oftentimes we take for granted this very globalized sort of society that we live in now, and all of this access to other cultures and understandings. And yes, there's still a ton of bigoted, racist, hot ass messes out there, but we have so much access to other people and other cultures, and critical writings and critical thought, and we're taught perspectives and all of these different things, where at that time it was there was one perspective pretty much, and it kind of was the same perspective that had come through Rome and through all these other cultures of conquer, and the justification for all of those conquerings for the most part was, well, because God is a given, then it must be that it's him on our side, and that's why we're better. It's sad that, it always frustrates me that people don't really want to think critically about things, but I think it's even harder when nobody around you is thinking critically about it, right? I know we all think we're a special flower that would be the different person, but I think ultimately many of us would have just very much been products of our environment.
It makes me wonder, though, just how much of it is something that we haven't taken a look at. Why haven't we gone back and had a new constitutional convention and redrafted it to be less Roman, now that we do have these kinds of resources?
Oh, because people worship the Constitution. Because
people worship the Constitution, and I feel like that's what we're going to need to cover in the next episode, is why. Because that's something that should really be rethought about, and probably, the reason why I think personally that America has so many problems that we're constantly coming into and facing is this weird fascination and the want to tie ourselves directly into these government processes that just don't work, and we keep them around for the sake that it's traditional,
and the
this has always been this way. The Electoral College being one prime example. Trash. It doesn't work, and there's many ways we can throw that out.
Chiming in from California.
In addition to
it's the worst.
I was gonna say too, even just certain states that probably need to split up, like California needs to be split into 5 states, or even just having a bicameral Congress that should probably be split into 3. There's different ways that we should probably be exploring, and we keep them around for tradition. And I think in reality we just need to throw out the Constitution and start again, because America is not what it once was, and it's founded under very different principles, under very different assumptions, and we could stop being Rome and be something more like Sweden if we wanted to.
But patriotism.
What's so funny,
but it doesn't. It works for people at the top, and that's why we haven't.
Right, but so our bylines historically have been supernaturalist language. The Greeks, the sophists, they believed that the constitutions were given to us by the gods.
Right.
That's how they came from. And so
people still very much believe that in weird ways.
We touched on the Constitution Bible, remember?
Oh, God.
Well, so
episode 2.
and if it weren't for Trump, I probably would have said that this would happen sooner. But it's really interesting as we become a more and more secular, rationalist society, the language of the past is going to become more and more futile. And so there's going to be stranger justifications for the economic structure. And since we've talked so much about how it ties first to economy, what economic rhetoric is going to be the new rhetoric that's going to justify itself outside of supernaturalism? Yeah. What rhetoric is going to be powerful enough to justify this way of being the way it is today? I don't know.
I think it's going to go along the lines of, like, Elon Musk is furthering our rights into space to make sure that humanity has a future. I think it's going to be futurism.
That would make a lot of sense. Okay, we're almost out of time, right?
Yeah.
Basically. Yeah. So next week, we're going to talk a little bit more about the Constitution. We're also going to talk about the time the Southern Baptist Convention was pro-abortion, and how segregationist school teachers became talk show hosts. Those will all make sense in the next episode. I'm not going to tell anyone a damn thing until then.
Yeah.
Okay, so I also want to just say, we're going to be doing a live episode. We haven't decided when we're doing the live episode, but I'm thinking it's going to be the week of release of this one, just for funsies.
And it'll be like a midweek episode, it won't take the place of your normal educational, aspirational content.
Yes, we'll still have our regular episodes with all the things Andrew just listed. Just stay tuned on our socials, because that's how you'll find out. Where can everyone find your socials?
Take it away, Andrew.
So, you can find me as Red Sage 1 or 2 on most platforms. So, I'm trying to get them all on one page. It's not working out.
Best of luck.
Yeah. On TikTok, you can find me as Red Sage 1, Red_Sage 1. On Instagram, you can find me as Red_Sage 2. And I don't really have a Twitter yet, but I'm going to work on it.
If you get a Twitter, can it be Red_Sage 3?
Maybe, yes.
Love to see it, yeah.
If I can get away with it just being Red Sage, I'm going to do that. You can also find me with these guys on our YouTube channel.
Yeah. Also, thanks for all the lovely comments you guys have been leaving. They fuel my little black heart when I'm having a rough week, so thank you. You can find me on TikTok at Queen of the Heathens. You can find me on Instagram at Queen of Heathens. That will be of with a 0, but this will all be linked in the show notes. I'm also Queen of Heathens on Twitter. Same thing. O is a 0. Queen of Heathens on OnlyFans. No, I'm just kidding. There's no OnlyFans. It's a joke.
Yet.
Only Founding Fathers is coming, but not yet. All right. With that, I think we're signing off, right?
Oh, I didn't say where to find me. You can find me at Jegaysus everywhere. Yay.
Yay, sorry.
Outside of that, I know some people did leave comments saying that they weren't able to access YouTube because it's hard to sit down for a video, which I get. So I just want to make sure to check us out on all the podcasting platforms. Right. We have, the Spotifys, the Apples, the Stitchers of the world. Rate, comment, subscribe. Those things help us. I forgot that people are supposed to say that, or at least YouTubers I watch. Subscribe, click, alarm, notify.
Punch the like button. I don't know.
Do that thing.
Smacking the like.
Smacking the like, yeah.
We'll talk to everyone later. Thanks for joining us.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.